Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Unraveling. Derek Morrison adjusted his rearview mirror and glanced at his wife Amanda in the passenger seat. After 12 years of marriage, he still found himself occasionally marveling at how he'd managed to win over the beautiful redhead who'd walked into his construction office looking for a job as an accountant. She sat quietly now, scrolling through her phone, her emerald eyes reflecting the dashboard light as the highway stretched endlessly before them. They were returning from Amanda's sister's wedding in Sacramento, a 3-day affair that had drained Derek both emotionally and financially. Amanda had insisted they stay at the most expensive hotel, buy an elaborate gift, and rent a luxury car for the trip. Derek hadn't minded. His construction company, Morrison Heavy Industries, was pulling in 7 figures annually, and he'd always believed in treating his wife like a queen. "We need gas," Amanda said without looking up from her phone. "There's a station at the next exit." Derek nodded, noting the fuel gauge hovering near empty. The digital clock read 11:47 p.m., and they still had 2 hours of driving ahead of them. The gas station that appeared at exit 47 looked like something from a forgotten era, a single island with 2 pumps under flickering fluorescent lights, attached to a small convenience store with bars on the windows. "I'll go pay inside," Derek said, pulling up to the pump. "Want anything?" "Diet Coke and some gum," Amanda replied, still absorbed in her phone. Derek had built his business on reading people, on understanding motivations, and detecting when something wasn't quite right. It's what had made him successful in the cutthroat world of commercial construction. As he filled the tank, he noticed Amanda typing furiously, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. She seemed more animated than she'd been all weekend. The convenience store's bell chimed as Derek entered. Behind the counter stood a young Hispanic man, maybe mid-20s, with nervous eyes that immediately locked onto Derek's face. The man's name tag read Miguel, and his hands trembled slightly as he straightened some lottery tickets. "Pump 2, Derek said, approaching the counter with Amanda's requested items. Miguel's eyes darted toward the window where Amanda sat in the car, then back to Derek. He rang up the items with shaking fingers, and as Derek handed over his credit card, Miguel did something strange. He grabbed a receipt from the register, scribbled something quickly on the back, and folded it in half. "Sir," Miguel whispered, glancing around the empty store as if someone might be watching. "Take this. Don't let her see." Derek looked puzzled, but something in Miguel's desperate expression made him accept the folded paper. Miguel's hand lingered for a moment, gripping Derek's wrist. "Please," Miguel added, his voice barely audible. "Read it when you're alone." Derek pocketed the note, collected his receipt and the items, and headed back to the car. Amanda looked up as he approached, and Derek could swear he saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment? Annoyance? "That took forever," she said, accepting the Diet Coke. "Sorry, long line," Derek lied, settling into the driver's seat. The folded receipt felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. They drove in relative silence for the next 20 minutes, Amanda returning to her phone while Derek's mind raced. What could a complete stranger possibly have to tell him that required such secrecy? And why had Miguel seemed to recognize Amanda? "I need to use the bathroom," Derek announced, pulling into a well-lit rest stop. "This can't wait." Amanda shrugged. "I'll stay here. Just hurry up." In the privacy of the rest stop bathroom, Derek unfolded the receipt with trembling hands. Written in Miguel's hurried scrawl were just 3 words that made his blood run cold. "Run now." Derek stared at the note, his successful businessman's mind trying to process the implications. Run from what? From whom? He thought about Miguel's frightened eyes, the way the young man had looked at Amanda with recognition, the urgency in his whispered plea. Returning to the car, Derek studied his wife with new eyes. Amanda was still on her phone, but now he noticed things he'd somehow missed before. The way she'd been distant all weekend, checking her messages constantly, the slight smile that played at her lips when she thought he wasn't looking. "Everything okay?" Amanda asked, glancing up. "Fine," Derek replied, starting the engine. But his mind was far from fine. 12 years of marriage, built on what he'd thought was love and trust, suddenly felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. As they drove through the night, Derek Morrison, the man who'd built an empire through careful planning and ruthless execution, began to wonder if his perfect life was nothing more than an elaborate lie. And if it was, he knew with absolute certainty that someone would pay dearly for the deception. The highway stretched ahead, but Derek's destination was no longer home. His destination was the truth, no matter how brutal it might be. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception. Derek barely slept that night. Amanda had curled up beside him in their king-sized bed, the same bed where they'd made love countless times, where they'd planned their future, where she'd cried in his arms when she'd miscarried 3 years ago. Now it felt like sleeping next to a stranger. The next morning, Amanda announced she was meeting her book club, a monthly tradition Derek had never questioned. She kissed his cheek with lips that suddenly felt cold and hollow. "I'll be back around 4," she said, grabbing her purse and keys. The moment her BMW pulled out of their circular driveway, Derek was on the phone with Tony Ricci, his private investigator. Tony had helped Derek with background checks on potential business partners and had proven both discreet and thorough. "I need you to follow my wife," Derek said without preamble. "Jesus, Derek, you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Within an hour, Tony was tailing Amanda's BMW while Derek sat in his home office, staring at financial records he'd never bothered to examine closely. Amanda handled their personal finances, and he'd trusted her completely. Now that trust felt like naive stupidity. His phone buzzed at 2:30 p.m. Tony's voice was grim. "Derek, you're going to want to sit down for this. Just tell me." "She's at the Riverside Motel on Highway 9. Room 237. She's been there for 2 hours with a guy named Troy Brennan. I ran his plates. He owns Brennan Construction, your biggest competitor for the Millfield Shopping Center project." Derek's grip tightened on the phone. Troy Brennan. They'd competed for contracts before, and Troy had always seemed to know just enough about Derek's bids to come in slightly lower. Now, Derek understood how. "There's more," Tony continued. "I did some digging on Brennan. Guy's got gambling debts up to his eyeballs. Owes serious money to some very unforgiving people. The kind who break kneecaps first and ask questions later. Keep following them. I want to know everything. Where they go, what they do, who they meet." Derek hung up and walked to his safe, retrieving the .45 Colt he'd purchased years ago for home protection. He'd never thought he'd need it for anything else. The weight of it in his hand felt reassuring, solid, real in a world that had suddenly become filled with lies. His phone rang again at 6:15 p.m. "They're at Gino's Steakhouse," Tony reported, having what looks like a very serious conversation. "Brennan keeps checking his watch, and your wife looks nervous as hell. I got close enough to catch some of their conversation. And they're planning something big, Derek. Something involving insurance money and making it look like an accident. I heard Brennan mention next Tuesday and something about the Millfield site." Derek's blood turned to ice. Next Tuesday was when they were scheduled to begin foundation work on the Millfield project, his biggest contract of the year. A project worth $12 million, with life insurance policies that would pay Amanda $3 million if something happened to him on the job. "Tony, I need you to find out everything you can about Troy Brennan's connections, his debts, his habits. And I want to know how long this affair has been going on. Derek, maybe you should call the police." "No police. Not yet. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with first." That night, Amanda returned home with shopping bags and a smile that Derek now recognized as completely artificial. She chatted about her book club meeting, describing discussions of novels Derek was certain she'd never read. Every word felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch beside him. "Productive," Derek replied, watching her face carefully. "Tony called. Says there's been some suspicious activity around the Millfield site. Thinks someone might be planning to sabotage the project." Amanda's face went pale for just a split second before she recovered. "That's terrible. Do they know who?" "We're working on it. But Amanda, I want you to stay away from the construction sites for a while, just until we figure out what's going on." Of course, she said quickly. Too quickly. Derek excused himself to his office and pulled out his laptop. If Amanda and Troy thought they could manipulate him, they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong target. Derek Morrison hadn't built a multi-million-dollar business by being naive or forgiving. He'd built it by being smarter, more ruthless, and infinitely more patient than his competitors. Over the next 3 days, the picture became devastatingly clear. Tony's investigation revealed that Amanda and Troy had been meeting for 8 months. Bank records showed Amanda had been slowly draining their joint savings account, moving money into a private account Derek knew nothing about. Phone records reveal hundreds of calls and texts between them. But the most damning evidence came from Miguel Santos, the gas station attendant who'd handed Derek the warning note. Tony tracked him down and discovered he was Troy's cousin, and the person originally recruited to help stage Derek's accident. Miguel got cold feet, Tony explained during their Wednesday meeting. His conscience got the better of him. Apparently, Troy promised him 10 grand to help, but when Miguel realized they were talking about actual murder, not just theft, he wanted out. Murder, Derek repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. They're planning to rig a structural collapse at the Millfield site. Make it look like faulty equipment or worker negligence. Troy has connections in the building inspector's office who'll cover up any evidence of sabotage. Amanda gets the insurance money. Troy gets Amanda and a cut of the payout, and Derek Morrison becomes just another construction site fatality. Derek sat in silence for a long moment, processing the full scope of their betrayal. His wife, the woman he'd loved for 12 years, the woman he'd comforted through her mother's death, the woman who'd shared his bed and his dreams, was planning to murder him for money. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and cold. Tony, I need you to get me everything. Phone records, bank statements, photographs, recordings if possible. I want documentation of every meeting, every call, every dollar transferred. What are you planning, Derek? Derek's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm planning to give my beloved wife and her lover exactly what they deserve. But first, I'm going to let them think their plan is working perfectly. This is dangerous territory. They made it dangerous when they decided to kill me, Derek interrupted. Now it's just a question of who gets destroyed first. As Derek Morrison sat in his office that night, surrounded by evidence of the ultimate betrayal, he felt something cold and final settle in his chest. The man who'd built his fortune by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else was about to show Amanda and Troy Brennan what it really meant to be outmaneuvered. The game was just beginning, and Derek intended to be the only one left standing when it ended. Chapter 3: The Art of War. Derek Morrison had always been a chess player, thinking 5 moves ahead while his opponents struggled with their next move. As he sat in his study Friday evening, reviewing Tony's latest intelligence report, he felt the familiar rush of strategic planning that had made him millions in construction. Amanda was upstairs, preparing for what she'd told him was a girls' night out with her sister. Derek now knew she was meeting Troy at a cabin in the mountains, 30 miles outside town, a location Tony had identified as their primary planning headquarters. The timeline is accelerating, Tony had reported that afternoon. They're moving the plan up to Monday. Brennan's gotten pressure from his creditors, and they can't wait until Tuesday. Monday, 4 days from now. Derek opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. If Amanda and Troy wanted to play a deadly game, he'd give them one they'd never forget. The first phase of Derek's counter-strategy was simple. Make them believe their plan was proceeding flawlessly while simultaneously documenting everything for the authorities. But Derek had no intention of simply surviving their murder attempt. He intended to destroy them completely, methodically, and with a thoroughness that would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider betraying him. His phone buzzed. A text from Amanda, staying at Julie's tonight. Love you. Derek smiled coldly. Julie was Amanda's sister, and Tony had confirmed she was currently in Denver visiting her daughter. Another lie in an ever-growing web of deception. What else? Amanda wants to be there. She wants to watch. Derek gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd loved, wanted to watch him die. Miguel, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Troy scares me, but what they're planning, it's wrong. You don't deserve this. Meet me at the Denny's on Foster Road in 20 minutes. Come alone, and make sure no one follows you. Miguel Santos was even younger than Derek had initially thought, maybe 23 or 24, with the calloused hands of someone who worked construction between gas station shifts. His resemblance to Troy was unmistakable. Same dark hair, same olive complexion, but where Troy carried himself with arrogant confidence, Miguel radiated nervous energy and genuine remorse. Troy's my cousin, Miguel explained, stirring his coffee with shaking hands. But we ain't close. My mom made me promise to look out for him when he got in trouble with gambling. But this is murder, man. Tell me everything, Derek said. They've been meeting at that cabin for months. Troy showed me pictures of you. Said you were some rich contractor who was making life hard for working people. He made it sound like you deserved it, you know? But then I started reading about your company online. You employ like 200 people. You donate to charity. You're not some evil rich guy. What's the plan for Monday? Miguel's face went pale. Troy's got a guy in the inspector's office, someone who owes him money from poker games. The crane's going to malfunction while you're doing the morning walkthrough. It's supposed to look like the boom hydraulics failed, and the whole thing comes down on you. But it won't be a malfunction. No, sir. Troy's going to cut the hydraulic lines just enough that they'll fail under pressure. When you start the crane up for the morning inspection, boom, no more Derek Morrison. Derek studied Miguel's face, reading the genuine fear and guilt there. Why did you warn me? Because I got a daughter, man. She's only 2, but someday she's going to ask me what kind of man her daddy was. I don't want to have to tell her I helped kill an innocent person for money. Miguel, I'm going to ask you to do something dangerous. If you say no, I'll understand, but if you say yes, I'll make sure you and your daughter are taken care of for life. Miguel met Derek's eyes. What do you need? I need you to go through with helping Troy, but I need you to document everything. Record conversations if you can. Take pictures, gather evidence. Can you do that without getting caught? I think so. Troy trusts me because we're family. Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope containing $5,000 in cash. This is just the beginning. When this is over, there'll be $50,000 more, plus a job with my company that pays twice what you're making now. Miguel stared at the money. Why are you doing this? Why not just call the police? Derek's smile was cold and calculating. Because I don't just want to stop them, Miguel. I want to destroy them so completely that they'll wish they'd never been born. And for that, I need them to think their plan is working right up until the moment it all falls apart. What if they kill you before you can stop them? They won't, Derek said with absolute certainty. Because I'm going to be 3 steps ahead of them every minute of every day until this is over. That weekend, Derek played the role of unsuspecting husband perfectly. He was affectionate with Amanda, discussed their upcoming vacation plans, and even suggested they renew their vows for their upcoming anniversary. Amanda's responses were enthusiastic and loving, each word a masterpiece of deception. Sunday night, as Amanda lay sleeping beside him, Derek received a text from Miguel. It's done. Meeting tomorrow at 6 a.m. Troy says it'll be over by 7. Derek looked at his wife's peaceful face in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. In less than 7 hours, she would be watching from a distance as her husband was supposedly crushed to death by a sabotage crane. The woman who'd promised to love him in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, was planning to collect $3 million in life insurance money before his body was even cold. Derek Morrison had built his empire by understanding that in business, as in war, victory belonged to whoever was willing to be more ruthless than their opponents. As he watched Amanda sleep, he realized that tomorrow would mark the beginning of the most important battle of his life. And unlike his wife and her lover, Derek Morrison had no intention of losing. Chapter 4. The Perfect Storm. Monday morning arrived with overcast skies and the promise of rain. Fitting weather for what Derek knew would be one of the most crucial days of his life. He went through his normal routine. Coffee, shower, quick scan of construction reports, kiss goodbye to Amanda, who wished him a safe day at work with what Derek now recognized as barely concealed anticipation. At 5:45 a.m., Derek sat his truck outside the Millfield construction site, watching Tony's surveillance team take their positions. Miguel's van was already parked across the street, positioned to record everything that would happen in the next hour. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Troy here. Setting up now. Equipment exactly where you said it would be. Phase 1 of Derek's counterplan was elegantly simple. Let Troy sabotage the crane exactly as planned, but ensure that Derek would be nowhere near the equipment when it malfunctioned. Tony's team had identified the perfect vantage point where Amanda would be watching. A hill overlooking the construction site, approximately 400 yards away. At 6:15 a.m., Derek entered the construction site through the main gate, making sure to wave at the security camera. He wanted a clear record of his arrival time. Miguel's surveillance would show Troy making final adjustments to the crane's hydraulic system, believing Derek would be conducting his routine morning inspection in 15 minutes. Derek's phone rang. Tony's voice was tense. Target acquired. Amanda's in position on the hill, has binoculars trained on the crane. She's got a clear view of everything. Perfect. Miguel, you there? Yes, sir. Troy just finished with the hydraulics. He's telling me to get ready to call 911 when the accident happens. Remember, act shocked when it goes down. You're just an innocent bystander who happened to witness a tragic workplace accident. At exactly 6:30 a.m., Derek walked toward the crane, hard hat in place, clipboard in hand, playing the role of the unsuspecting victim. He climbed into the operator's cab and began the startup sequence, knowing that Troy and Amanda were watching every movement. The hydraulic system engaged with a mechanical whine that sounded perfectly normal. Derek operated the boom controls, lifting and rotating exactly as he would during a standard inspection. For 30 seconds, everything functioned smoothly. Then Derek activated the emergency shutdown and quickly exited the cab, disappearing behind a concrete barrier just as the sabotaged hydraulic lines finally gave way. The crane's boom came down with devastating force, crushing the operator's cab exactly where Derek should have been sitting. The sound of twisted metal and shattering glass echoed across the construction site like thunder. Miguel's panicked voice carried across the site. "Oh my God! Call 911. Derek's under there." Derek smiled grimly as he crouched behind the concrete barrier. Let Amanda think she'd succeeded. Let her start planning how to spend his life insurance money. Meanwhile, Tony's cameras were recording every moment of her reaction from the hillside. Derek's phone buzzed with texts from concerned employees and suppliers who'd heard about the accident on emergency scanners. The performance was flawless. 20 minutes later, as emergency responders combed through the wreckage looking for Derek's body, Tony called with an update. Amanda just called someone. She's crying, but Derek, these aren't tears of grief. She looks relieved, almost excited. Who did she call? Brennan. He should be arriving any minute to console the grieving widow. Derek made his way off the construction site through a rear exit Tony's team had identified, slipping away undetected while first responders continued their search. The official story would be that Derek Morrison's body had been completely destroyed in the crane collapse. A tragic accident that would trigger a lengthy investigation and a very large life insurance payout. But Derek Morrison wasn't dead. He was very much alive, and he was about to become Amanda and Troy's worst nightmare. Phase 2 of Derek's plan began immediately. While Amanda played the role of devastated widow at the construction site, Derek was already 3 miles away, meeting with Harold Voss, the senior partner at the law firm that handled his business affairs. "Harold, I need you to execute the contingency plan we discussed," Derek said, placing a thick envelope on the lawyer's desk. Voss opened the envelope and examined the contents: photographs, financial records, audio recordings, and a detailed timeline of Amanda and Troy's conspiracy. Jesus Christ, Derek. This is comprehensive. It's also ironclad. Every piece of evidence was gathered legally, and it's all admissible in court. I want you to contact the DA's office immediately. Tell them Derek Morrison is alive and ready to press charges for attempted murder and conspiracy. What about your wife? The insurance company? Derek's smile was sharp as a blade. Amanda's about to discover that her husband's life insurance policy contains a very interesting clause about payouts in cases involving beneficiary fraud. She'll get exactly nothing. And Troy Brennan is about to learn that his gambling debts are the least of his problems. By noon, Derek was sitting in District Attorney Patricia Henley's office, laying out the entire conspiracy with a methodical precision that had made him successful in business. Henley, a tough prosecutor with a reputation for going after white-collar criminals, listened with growing amazement. "Mr. Morrison, this is one of the most well-documented attempted murder cases I've ever seen. We can have arrest warrants within hours." "I appreciate that, but I need you to wait exactly 48 hours before making any arrests." "Why?" Derek leaned forward, his expression coldly calculating. "Because I want them to think they've succeeded completely. I want Amanda to start spending money she thinks she's going to inherit. I want Troy to start making plans for their future together. And I want them both to realize exactly how thoroughly they've been outmaneuvered." "That's a dangerous game, Mr. Morrison." "Patricia, they try to murder me for money. Dangerous doesn't begin to describe what I'm prepared to do to them." That afternoon, hidden cameras captured Amanda and Troy celebrating at the mountain cabin where they'd planned Derek's death. The footage showed them toasting with champagne, discussing how to split the insurance money, and making love on the same bed where they'd plotted her husband's murder. Miguel, still playing his role as innocent bystander, called Derek with updates. "Troy's already talking about taking Amanda to Mexico once the insurance money comes through. He thinks you're really dead, man." "They both do." "Perfect. Keep recording everything." In 48 hours, their entire world is going to collapse. Tuesday evening, Derek attended his own memorial service, not in person, but through surveillance cameras Tony had positioned throughout the funeral home. He watched Amanda play the grieving widow flawlessly, accepting condolences from business associates, friends, and family members who had no idea they were witnessing an elaborate performance. The most sickening moment came when Amanda gave a tearful eulogy about their perfect marriage and Derek's dedication to his family and employees. Every word was a lie, delivered with Oscar-worthy conviction to an audience that included people who genuinely cared about Derek. "She's good," Tony observed, watching the surveillance feed with Derek. "If I didn't know the truth, I'd believe every word." "She's had 12 years to perfect the performance," Derek replied coldly. But the show's almost over. Wednesday morning brought the news Derek had been waiting for. Amanda had contacted the insurance company to begin processing his death benefit claim. She'd also made appointments with 3 different investment advisors to discuss managing her late husband's estate. Troy, meanwhile, had called his creditors to assure them that his debts would be paid within weeks. He'd even put a deposit down on a new truck and started looking at houses in Mexico. It was time for the final act. Derek placed a call to Patricia Henley. 48 hours are up. It's time to bring them in. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we make arrests, there's no going back. This becomes public record." Derek thought about Amanda's performance at his memorial service, about Troy's celebratory phone calls to his creditors, about the 12 years of marriage that had apparently meant nothing to the woman he'd loved. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The arrests would happen simultaneously at 6 a.m. Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Derek's death. Amanda would be taken into custody at their home, while Troy would be arrested at his apartment. Both would face charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud. But Derek's revenge wouldn't end with their arrests. It would only be beginning, because Derek Morrison had learned something important about himself during the past week. He was capable of a level of cold, calculating ruthlessness that surprised even him. And Amanda and Troy Brennan were about to discover just how thoroughly they'd underestimated the man they tried to kill. Chapter 5. Psychological Warfare. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather, as if nature itself was mocking the cold-blooded plans that had been set in motion exactly 1 week earlier. Derek Morrison sat in an unmarked surveillance van 2 blocks from his own house, watching through high-powered cameras as a team of federal agents prepared to arrest his wife. At exactly 6 a.m., the coordinated arrests began. Derek's house looked peaceful in the early morning light, the same house where he'd shared 12 years of marriage, where he believed he was building a life with someone who loved him. Amanda would be in their bedroom now, probably still asleep, dreaming of Mexico beaches and spending the money she thought she'd inherit from his death. The federal agents didn't bother with subtlety. They pounded on the front door with the kind of authority that left no room for negotiation. Through the surveillance feed, Derek watched Amanda stumble to the door in her bathrobe, still half asleep and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. "Amanda Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder in the first degree." Derek couldn't hear her exact words, but he could see Amanda's face through the telephoto lens. The progression of emotions was fascinating to watch. Confusion, then disbelief, then growing horror as the reality of her situation became clear. "Where's my husband?" she demanded, loud enough for the surveillance equipment to pick up. "My husband is dead." "What are you talking about?" Agent Sarah Collins, the FBI's lead investigator on the case, stepped forward with a manila folder containing photographs. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband is very much alive, and he has some very interesting things to tell us about your recent activities." Derek watched Amanda's face go completely white. It was the moment he'd been waiting for, the instant when she realized her perfect plan had failed spectacularly. Simultaneously, across town, Troy Brennan was being dragged from his apartment in handcuffs. Unlike Amanda, Troy immediately understood what was happening and began demanding a lawyer before the agents even finished reading his rights. "Smart man," Tony observed from the surveillance van. "Too bad he wasn't smart enough to avoid trying to murder someone who's better at this game than he is." Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Miguel, watching the news. "Holy shit, man. You really did it." "Phase 1 is complete," Derek replied. "Now we move to Phase 2. Phase 2 was where Derek's business acumen and understanding of human psychology would really shine. The arrests were just the beginning. Derek intended to systematically destroy every aspect of Amanda and Troy's lives with the same methodical precision he'd used to build his construction empire. By noon, Derek was sitting in Patricia Henley's office, reviewing the charges that would be filed against his would-be killers. "We've got them cold on attempted murder," Henley explained. "The evidence is overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial records, witness testimony from Miguel Santos, and physical evidence from the sabotaged equipment. They're looking at 25 to life. What about bail? Given the severity of the charges and the flight risk, I'm requesting they be held without bail. The judge will make the final decision, but I'm confident." Derek nodded. "Patricia, I need you to understand something. This case isn't just about justice for me. It's about sending a message that certain betrayals come with consequences that extend far beyond prison sentences." "What exactly are you planning, Derek?" "I'm planning to show them what it feels like to have their entire world systematically destroyed. And I'm going to do it completely within the bounds of the law." The first step was financial warfare. Derek had always kept detailed records of every dollar Amanda had access to, and now those records became weapons. His forensic accountant discovered that Amanda had embezzled over $200,000 from their joint accounts over the past 8 months, moving money into hidden accounts to fund her future with Troy. By Thursday evening, Derek had filed civil suits to recover every stolen dollar, plus damages and legal fees. The lawsuits would freeze Amanda's access to any remaining funds and ensure that even if she somehow avoided prison, she'd emerge financially destroyed. Troy's financial destruction was even more satisfying. Derek contacted every one of Troy's creditors: the loan sharks, the casino debts, the outstanding business loans, and informed them that Troy Brennan was in federal custody facing murder charges. The message was clear: collect your debts now, because Troy's financial situation was only going to get worse. Within 48 hours, Troy's construction business was in bankruptcy proceedings, his equipment was being repossessed, and his remaining assets were being seized by creditors who had suddenly lost patience with his payment schedules. But Derek's most devastating psychological attack was yet to come. On Saturday morning, Derek visited Amanda in the county jail where she was being held pending trial. It was their first face-to-face encounter since the morning she'd kissed him goodbye before his planned murder. Amanda looked haggard in her orange jumpsuit, her red hair unwashed, and her usual confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. When she saw Derek walk into the visitation room, very much alive and wearing an expensive suit, her reaction was everything he'd hoped for. "Derek," she whispered, tears starting to flow. "Thank God you're alive." We all thought. You thought I was dead. Derek finished, sitting across from her with the calm demeanor of a man completely in control. You thought you'd successfully murdered me for the insurance money. No, that's not. I don't know what they've told you, but Derek placed a manila folder on the table between them. Amanda, I know everything. Every meeting with Troy, every phone call, every dollar you stole, every detail of your plan to kill me. I have recordings, photographs, financial records, and witness testimony. You're going to prison for a very long time. Amanda's composure finally cracked completely. Derek, please, you have to understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Troy said, he promised. Troy promised you what? That murdering me would solve all your problems? That you could start a new life with my money. I love you, Amanda sobbed. I've always loved you. This was all Troy's idea. Derek studied his wife's face, looking for any trace of the woman he thought he'd married. All he saw was a stranger wearing Amanda's face, a manipulative sociopath who was now trying to save herself by throwing her co-conspirator under the bus. Amanda, I want you to listen very carefully, Derek said, his voice calm and cold. I'm going to make sure you get the maximum possible sentence. I'm going to testify against you in vivid detail. I'm going to make sure every person in our social circle, every member of your family, everyone who ever knew us as a couple understands exactly what you tried to do to me. Derek, please. I'm not finished. I'm also going to make sure that when you get out of prison, if you get out of prison, you have absolutely nothing left. No money, no property, no reputation, no future. You tried to erase me from existence, Amanda. Now I'm going to return the favor. Derek stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Amanda, Troy's already trying to make a deal with the prosecutors. He's planning to testify that the whole thing was your idea. Apparently, your great love is willing to let you take the fall to save his own skin. The anguished wail that followed Derek down the hallway was the most satisfying sound he'd heard in weeks. That evening, Derek sat in his study, reviewing plans for the reconstruction of his life. The house would be sold. He could never live there again after what Amanda had planned. The business would continue and grow stronger than ever. And Derek Morrison would emerge from this betrayal harder, smarter, and infinitely more ruthless than before. His phone rang. Miguel's voice was excited. Derek, you need to turn on Channel 7 News. They're running the story about the arrests. Derek switched on the television to see his own photograph, a professional headshot from his company website, displayed next to the anchor's report about the failed murder plot. The story had everything. A successful businessman, his beautiful but treacherous wife, her lover who was also a business rival, and a murder plot worthy of a Hollywood thriller. The case is being called one of the most elaborate attempted murder schemes in the county's history, the anchor reported. Morrison Construction CEO is cooperating fully with authorities, and sources say the evidence against the defendants is overwhelming. Derek smiled coldly. By tomorrow, the story would be picked up by national news outlets. Amanda and Troy would become cautionary tales, their names forever associated with greed, betrayal, and spectacularly failed criminal schemes. But Derek's revenge was far from complete. The trial would provide opportunities for even more comprehensive destruction of his enemies' lives. And Derek Morrison, the man who'd built an empire through careful planning and ruthless execution, was just getting started. Chapter 6, The Reckoning Approaches. 3 months later, Derek Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new penthouse office, looking out over the city where he'd built his empire and nearly lost his life. The view was spectacular, 30 floors above the streets where ordinary people lived their ordinary lives, unaware that they were looking up at a man who had recently stared death in the face and emerged stronger than ever. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed, thanks largely to the overwhelming evidence Derek had meticulously gathered. Amanda and Troy's cases had been separated after Troy's lawyers argued that their client had been manipulated by Derek's wife. It was a desperate strategy that fooled no one, but it gave Derek the satisfaction of watching his enemies turn on each other like rabid dogs. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Morrison, your attorney, Mr. Voss, is here for your trial preparation meeting. Send him in. Harold Voss entered carrying a thick briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd seen plenty of courtroom battles, but had rarely held cards this strong. Derek, we need to go over your testimony one more time. The trial starts Monday, and Patricia Henley wants to make sure every detail is perfect. Derek turned from the window, his face calm and composed. Harold, I've been preparing for this testimony for months. Every word, every pause, every gesture has been calculated for maximum impact. The defense is going to try to paint you as a vengeful husband who orchestrated this entire situation to frame an innocent woman. Derek's laugh was cold and humorless. Innocent? Harold, she tried to murder me for insurance money. The jury is going to see photographs of her celebrating at Troy's cabin while my memorial service was being planned. They're going to hear recordings of her discussing how to spend my life insurance money. They're going to see financial records showing she embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from our joint accounts. Amanda's lawyer is claiming she was emotionally abused, that she feared for her life, that Troy manipulated her into going along with his plan. And what does the evidence say about that? Voss opened his briefcase and spread out photographs across Derek's conference table. The images told a devastating story. Amanda and Troy laughing together at restaurants, embracing passionately in hotel rooms. Amanda driving expensive cars she'd purchased with stolen money. Troy and Amanda toasting with champagne at the mountain cabin where they'd planned Derek's death. The evidence says she was a willing and enthusiastic participant in a murder conspiracy, Voss concluded. But juries can be unpredictable, especially when the defendant is an attractive woman with a sympathetic story. Derek walked to his desk and picked up a folder marked contingency plans. Harold, I've spent my entire career preparing for worst-case scenarios. This situation is no different. What's in the folder? Insurance. If the jury somehow fails to convict Amanda and Troy of attempted murder, I have backup strategies that will ensure they still pay for what they try to do to me. Voss looked nervous. Derek, you can't take justice into your own hands. I'm not talking about vigilante justice, Harold. I'm talking about civil litigation, financial warfare, and social destruction that will be completely legal and absolutely devastating. These people tried to erase me from existence. If the criminal justice system fails to hold them accountable, I'll find other ways to ensure they spend the rest of their lives paying for their betrayal. That afternoon, Derek met with Miguel Santos at an upscale restaurant across town. Miguel had cleaned up nicely, gone with a gas station uniform and nervous demeanor, replaced by a well-tailored suit and the confident bearing of a man whose conscience was finally clear. You look good, Miguel. How's the new job working out? It's incredible, Derek. I'm making more money than I ever dreamed of, and your crew chief says I have real potential in construction management. Miguel paused, stirring his coffee. I still can't believe this all started with me working a night shift at a gas station. You did the right thing when it mattered most. That's worth something in this world. What do you think is going to happen to them? Amanda and Troy. Derek's expression hardened. They're going to learn that certain betrayals carry consequences that extend far beyond prison sentences. Even if they somehow avoid conviction, which they won't, their lives as they knew them are over. You really think the jury will convict? Miguel, you're going to testify about overhearing their murder plot. Tony's surveillance team is going to present photographs and recordings that prove premeditation. The forensic accountant is going to show financial records that prove Amanda's embezzlement and Troy's gambling debts. The equipment expert is going to demonstrate exactly how they sabotaged the crane. Derek leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of a man who'd spent years closing complex business deals. But most importantly, I'm going to take the stand and look each juror in the eye as I describe what it feels like to discover that your wife of 12 years is planning to murder you for money. By the time I'm finished testifying, the jury won't just want to convict Amanda and Troy. They'll want to throw away the key. That evening, Derek drove to the construction site where his death had been staged 3 months earlier. The crane had been repaired and was back in service, but Derek could still see the scars in the concrete where the sabotage boom had crashed down. The Millfield Shopping Center project was nearly complete now, a testament to Derek's determination to not let his enemies destroy what he'd built. His phone rang. Tony Ricci's voice was excited. Derek, you need to hear this. We just intercepted a phone call between Amanda and Troy. They're planning to change their pleas. To what? Amanda's going to claim temporary insanity, and Troy's going to plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for testifying against her. They're trying to save themselves by destroying each other. Derek smiled grimly. Perfect. Let them fight each other like animals. It'll make the prosecution's job even easier. There's more. Amanda's family is talking about mortgaging their house to pay for her defense. They still believe she's innocent, that you somehow framed her. They'll learn the truth when the evidence is presented at trial. And when they do, Amanda will lose the last shred of support she has left. As Derek drove home to his new apartment, he'd sold the house he'd shared with Amanda and moved into a luxury high-rise downtown. He reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few months. The man who had been a trusting husband was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous to those who might consider betraying him. The trial would begin in 4 days. Derek had spent weeks preparing for his testimony, practicing in front of mirrors and mock juries until every word was perfect. He'd chosen his wardrobe carefully, a dark navy suit that conveyed authority and respectability, a tie that suggested success without ostentation, shoes that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. But more than his appearance, Derek had prepared his mindset. He would be calm, controlled, and devastatingly effective on the witness stand. He would look directly at Amanda as he described her betrayal, forcing her to confront the consequences of her actions. He would speak to the jury as one human being to another, helping them understand the profound violation of trust that attempted murder represented. And when his testimony was complete, when the jury had heard every detail of Amanda and Troy's conspiracy, Derek Morrison would finally have the justice he'd been methodically, patiently, ruthlessly pursuing. The reckoning was almost at hand. Chapter 7. Justice Served Cold. Monday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and crystal-clear skies. Perfect weather for what Derek Morrison knew would be the most important day of his life since that night at the gas station when Miguel Santos had slipped him a warning that saved everything. The courthouse was an imposing granite structure that had witnessed decades of human drama, but rarely had it seen a case with stakes as personal and devastating as People versus Amanda Morrison and Troy Brennan. Derek arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in his carefully chosen navy suit, projecting the calm confidence of a man who had spent months preparing for this moment. The media attention was intense. Local news trucks lined the street, and reporters with cameras tried to catch Derek's attention as he walked up the courthouse steps. The story had captured public imagination. A successful businessman nearly murdered by his wife and her lover, saved only by the guilty conscience of a gas station attendant who happened to be the would-be killer's cousin. "Mr. Morrison," a reporter called out, "how do you feel about facing your wife in court today?" Derek paused at the courthouse entrance, looked directly into the camera, and spoke with the calm authority that had made him millions in construction. "Today is about justice. It's about holding people accountable for their actions. And it's about showing that some betrayals carry consequences that extend far beyond what the perpetrators ever imagined." Inside the courtroom, Derek took his seat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, where Patricia Henley was arranging her files with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The evidence against Amanda and Troy filled multiple boxes: photographs, recordings, financial documents, and witness statements that painted an undeniable picture of premeditated murder. At exactly 9 a.m., Amanda was led into the courtroom in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. Derek studied his wife's face as she sat at the defense table, noting how 3 months in county jail had changed her. Gone was the confident, beautiful woman who had kissed him goodbye on the morning of his planned murder. In her place sat a hollow-eyed stranger who looked like she'd aged years in just a few months. Troy entered separately, his own legal team having convinced him that cooperating with prosecutors offered his only chance of avoiding a life sentence. He looked even worse than Amanda. The stress of mounting legal bills and the constant threat of violence from unpaid creditors had taken a visible toll. Judge Martin Hendricks called the court to order, and the trial that Derek had been anticipating for months finally began. Patricia Henley's opening statement was a masterpiece of prosecutorial storytelling. She walked the jury through the entire conspiracy chronologically, from Amanda's first affair with Troy to their final celebration at the mountain cabin while Derek's memorial service was being planned. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Henley concluded, this case is about greed, betrayal, and attempted murder in its most cold-blooded form. The defendants didn't just plan to kill Derek Morrison. They planned to profit from his death while pretending to mourn him. They calculated that his life was worth exactly $3 million in insurance money, and they came within minutes of collecting that blood money. Amanda's defense attorney, an expensive criminal lawyer named Robert Shun, tried to paint his client as a victim of domestic abuse and Troy's manipulation. It was a desperate strategy that crumbled the moment the prosecution began presenting evidence. Miguel Santos was the first witness, and his testimony was devastating. Dressed in a crisp suit and speaking with quiet dignity, Miguel described overhearing Troy and Amanda planning Derek's murder at the mountain cabin, the pressure Troy had put on him to participate, and his ultimate decision to warn Derek instead. "Why did you decide to warn Mr. Morrison?" Henley asked. Miguel looked directly at the jury. "Because I have a 2-year-old daughter, and someday she's going to ask me what kind of man her father was. I couldn't live with myself if I let an innocent person be murdered for money." Amanda's lawyer tried to shake Miguel's testimony during cross-examination, suggesting he was lying to avoid prosecution for his own role in the conspiracy. But Miguel's story remained consistent. His demeanor remained credible, and his motivation, protecting an innocent man while preserving his own conscience, resonated powerfully with the jury. The prosecution's case built momentum over the next 2 days. Tony Ricci presented surveillance photographs and recordings that showed Amanda and Troy meeting regularly for months, discussing their plans, and celebrating what they believed was Derek's death. The forensic accountant detailed Amanda's systematic embezzlement of over $200,000 from joint accounts. The equipment expert demonstrated exactly how the crane had been sabotaged and explained that Derek would have been killed instantly if he'd been in the operator's cab when the boom collapsed. But the most powerful moment came on Wednesday afternoon, when Derek Morrison took the witness stand. Derek had practiced this testimony dozens of times, but sitting in the witness chair, looking out at the packed courtroom, he felt the full weight of what Amanda and Troy had tried to take from him. Not just his life, but his business, his reputation, his trust in human nature itself. Patricia Henley guided Derek through his testimony with the skill of a conductor leading a symphony. Derek described his marriage to Amanda, his growing success in construction, and his complete trust in the woman he'd loved for 12 years. He spoke about receiving Miguel's warning at the gas station, his investigation into Amanda's affair, and his growing realization that his wife was planning to murder him. "Mr. Morrison," Henley asked, "can you describe what it felt like to discover that your wife was planning to kill you?" Derek was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine pain mixed with cold fury. "It felt like having my entire life revealed as a lie. 12 years of marriage, every conversation, every intimate moment, every plan we'd made for the future, all of it was meaningless to her. I was just an obstacle standing between Amanda and $3 million in insurance money." Derek then looked directly at Amanda, who couldn't meet his eyes. "But what hurt most was realizing that she wanted to watch me die. She didn't just want me dead. She wanted to be there when it happened. She wanted to see the man who'd loved her for 12 years crushed to death by machinery she'd helped sabotage." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Several jurors were visibly emotional, and Amanda was quietly sobbing at the defense table. "Mr. Morrison," Henley continued, "how has this experience changed you?" Derek's answer was measured and cold. "It's taught me that some people are capable of betrayals so profound that forgiveness becomes impossible. It's shown me that trust, once broken completely, can never be repaired. And it's made me understand that when someone tries to destroy your life, the only appropriate response is to ensure they face consequences severe enough to match their actions." Amanda's defense attorney tried to suggest during cross-examination that Derek had somehow orchestrated the entire situation, that he'd manipulated events to frame his wife. But Derek's testimony remained consistent. His demeanor remained credible, and the physical evidence supported every aspect of his story. Thursday morning brought Troy Brennan's testimony as part of his plea agreement. Hoping to save himself from a life sentence, Troy provided devastating details about the conspiracy, confirming that Amanda had been an eager and willing participant in planning Derek's murder. But Troy's testimony backfired spectacularly when he tried to minimize his own role while painting Amanda as the mastermind. His obvious lies and self-serving statements destroyed any sympathy the jury might have had for either defendant. Friday afternoon, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Amanda Morrison guilty. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant Amanda Morrison guilty. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant Amanda Morrison guilty. Derek watched Amanda collapse as the verdicts were read. 12 years of marriage, reduced to 3 guilty verdicts and the promise of decades in prison. Troy received similar verdicts, his plea agreement saving him from life without parole, but still guaranteeing he'd spend at least 25 years behind bars. As Derek left the courthouse that afternoon, surrounded by reporters and cameras, he made one final statement. Justice has been served today. But more importantly, a message has been sent. There are some betrayals that carry consequences beyond anything the perpetrators could imagine. I hope Amanda and Troy have time to think about that during their very long prison sentences. That evening, Derek sat alone in his penthouse apartment, looking out over the city lights. The criminal trial was over, but his revenge was not yet complete. There would be civil suits to recover damages. There would be the systematic destruction of Troy's remaining business interests, and there would be the satisfaction of knowing that Amanda would spend the best years of her life in a prison cell, thinking about the man she tried to murder. Derek Morrison had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged victorious. But more than that, he discovered something important about himself. He was capable of a level of patient, methodical ruthlessness that even he hadn't fully understood before. And that knowledge would serve him well in the years to come. Chapter 8. The Final Accounting. 6 months after Amanda and Troy's convictions, Derek Morrison stood in the same courthouse where justice had been served, but this time he was there for the civil proceedings that would complete his systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. The criminal trial had been about justice. The civil suits were about revenge. Amanda sat at the defendant's table wearing prison orange, her hands shackled, looking like a broken woman who'd aged a decade since her arrest. The confident, beautiful wife who had planned Derek's murder was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed convict who would spend the next 30 years in maximum security prison. Troy wasn't present. He'd already signed agreements turning over what little remained of his assets to avoid an even larger judgment. His construction business was defunct, his equipment had been sold to pay creditors, and his reputation in the industry was permanently destroyed. The man who'd thought he could murder a competitor and steal his wife was working in the prison laundry for 90 cents an hour. Mr. Morrison, Derek's civil attorney, addressed the judge. We're seeking damages of $15 million. $5 million for emotional distress, $5 million for lost business opportunities during the investigation period, and $5 million in punitive damages to ensure the defendant understands the full consequences of her actions. Amanda's overworked public defender could barely mount a coherent response. Amanda's family had bankrupted themselves paying for her criminal defense, and she now faced this civil judgment with no resources and no hope. Your Honor, the public defender said weakly, my client is already serving a 30-year prison sentence. She has no assets and no ability to pay any judgment. Derek stood and addressed the court directly. Your Honor, this isn't about collecting money from someone who has nothing. This is about ensuring that every aspect of Amanda Morrison's life reflects the full consequences of her attempt to murder me. I want a judgment that will follow her for the rest of her life, ensuring that she never enjoys a moment of financial security or peace of mind. Judge Hendricks awarded Derek the full $15 million, creating a debt that would haunt Amanda forever, even if she somehow lived long enough to be released from prison. But Derek's most satisfying revenge was yet to come. That afternoon, Derek met with Patricia Henley at her office to discuss the final phase of his methodical destruction of his enemies. The criminal convictions were just the beginning, weren't they? Henley observed, studying Derek's calm demeanor. Patricia, they tried to erase me from existence. I'm simply returning the favor, but doing it better than they ever could have imagined. Derek opened a thick folder on Henley's desk. I've spent the past 6 months investigating every aspect of Amanda and Troy's lives. Their families, their friends, their business associates, their social connections. I've systematically contacted every person who ever had a relationship with either of them and made sure they understand exactly what kind of people they really are. That's thorough. Amanda's sister, Julie, who provided her with alibis during the planning phase. I provided Julie's employer with evidence that she was an accessory after the fact. Julie lost her job and is facing her own criminal charges. Derek turned the page, revealing photographs and documents. Troy's cousin Marcus, who helped launder some of the stolen money through his auto shop. His business is under investigation by the IRS, and he's looking at 5 years for money laundering. And this is all legal, completely legal. I'm simply ensuring that everyone who enabled Amanda and Troy's conspiracy faces appropriate consequences for their actions. Derek's systematic revenge extended beyond criminal accomplices. He'd used his business connections and financial resources to ensure that Amanda's family members lost jobs, faced foreclosure proceedings, and found themselves ostracized from social circles that no longer wanted to associate with the family of a convicted murderer. It was ruthless, comprehensive, and utterly devastating. But Derek's masterpiece of revenge was reserved for Amanda herself. That evening, Derek visited Amanda in prison for the second and final time. She looked even worse than she had at the civil trial. Thinner, grayer, with the defeated posture of someone who'd lost everything and knew it would never get better. Derek, Amanda said quietly as he sat across from her in the visitation room. I've been hoping you'd come. Have you now? I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I finally understand what I threw away. What we had was real, Derek. Our marriage meant something, even if I lost sight of that. Derek studied his former wife's face, looking for any trace of manipulation or deception. All he saw was genuine remorse, which somehow made her betrayal even more unforgivable. Amanda, I want you to understand something very clearly. I didn't come here for your apology. I came here to tell you exactly what your life is going to look like for the next 30 years. Amanda's face went pale. You'll never have privacy again. Every phone call will be monitored. Every letter will be read. Every visitor will be screened. You'll work for slave wages at whatever job the prison assigns you, and every penny you earn will go toward the $15 million judgment you can never hope to pay. Derek leaned forward, his voice taking on the cold precision that had made him millions in business. Your family has been destroyed. Your sister is facing criminal charges. Your parents lost their house paying for your defense. Your few remaining friends have been shown exactly what kind of person you really are. Derek, please. I'm not finished. When you're released, if you're released, you'll be in your 60s with no money, no home, no family, and no prospects. You'll be a convicted murderer who spent the best years of her life in prison, and every background check for the rest of your existence will remind the world of what you tried to do to me. Amanda was openly crying now, but Derek felt no sympathy. He felt only the cold satisfaction of a job completed perfectly. But most importantly, Amanda, I want you to know that I've rebuilt everything you tried to destroy. My business is more successful than ever. I've remarried, a woman who actually loves me instead of planning to murder me. I have the family and the life I always wanted, while you have exactly what you deserve. Derek stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Amanda, Troy is planning to appeal his conviction, and his lawyers think testifying that the entire murder plot was your idea might get his sentence reduced. Apparently, your great love is still trying to destroy you to save himself. The sound of Amanda's anguished sobs followed Derek down the prison corridor, but he felt no satisfaction in her pain. He felt only the calm completion that comes from a job done thoroughly and well. 2 years later, Derek Morrison stood at the altar of the same church where he'd married Amanda 15 years earlier, exchanging vows with Sarah Chun, the forensic accountant who'd helped unravel Amanda's financial crimes. Sarah was everything Amanda had pretended to be: intelligent, loyal, genuinely loving, and utterly trustworthy. The wedding was attended by Miguel Santos, now Derek's construction foreman and one of his closest friends, and Tony Ricci, who'd become Derek's head of security for the expanded Morrison Heavy Industries empire. As Derek kissed his new bride, he reflected on how profoundly the betrayal had changed him. The trusting husband who'd believed in unconditional love was gone, replaced by someone harder, more cautious, and infinitely more dangerous to those who might consider crossing him. Amanda Morrison was now prisoner number 47829 at the women's maximum security facility, working in the prison kitchen for 90 cents an hour and facing the possibility of dying behind bars. Troy Brennan was serving his sentence at a men's facility 300 miles away, his appeals having been denied and his former life completely erased. Derek Morrison had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged not just victorious, but transformed into someone who would never again be vulnerable to the kind of devastating deception that had nearly cost him his life. As he danced with his new wife at their wedding reception, Derek smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had achieved perfect justice. Some betrayals, he'd learned, require consequences that extend far beyond anything the perpetrators could have imagined. And Derek Morrison had delivered those consequences with the same methodical precision that had made him millions in construction, completely, ruthlessly, and permanently. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 5 years after the gas station warning that saved his life, Derek Morrison stood in his corner office on the 40th floor of Morrison Tower, the gleaming headquarters of what had become the largest construction empire on the West Coast. The company that Amanda had tried to inherit through murder now employed over 2,000 people and generated revenues approaching $500 million annually. The view from Derek's office encompassed the entire city, including the county jail where Amanda had first been held, the courthouse where justice had been served, and the construction sites where Derek's crews were building the future. It was a view that reminded him daily of how far he'd traveled from that night when a frightened gas station attendant had slipped him a note that changed everything. His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Morrison, your 3 o'clock appointment is here. Send him in." Miguel Santos entered wearing the tailored suit of a successful executive, carrying architectural plans under his arm and wearing the confident bearing of Morrison Heavy Industries Vice President of Operations. The scared young man who'd worked night shifts at a gas station was gone, replaced by one of Derek's most trusted lieutenants and closest friends. "The Riverside project is ahead of schedule and under budget," Miguel reported, spreading the plans across Derek's conference table. "The client is so impressed, they're already talking about Phase 2. Derek reviewed the plans with the practiced eye of someone who'd built his fortune understanding every detail of complex construction projects. "Outstanding work, Miguel. How's your daughter doing?" "Isabella's 7 now, reading at a high school level, and wants to be an architect when she grows up." Miguel smiled. "She says she wants to build beautiful buildings like Uncle Derek." Uncle Derek had been Isabella's name for Derek since she was 3 years old, and it never failed to warm something in Derek's chest that he'd thought Amanda's betrayal had killed forever. Miguel's family had become Derek's chosen family, proving that trust, once properly given, could create bonds stronger than blood. Derek's personal phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Sarah. "Dinner at 7? The twins have something to show you." Derek smiled at the message. Sarah was 6 months pregnant with their third child, and their 5-year-old twins, Derek Jr. and Amanda, named, ironically, for the woman who'd nearly destroyed their father's capacity for trust, were constantly creating new masterpieces they insisted on showing him the moment he walked through the door. "Miguel, let's wrap this up. I promised Sarah I'd be home for dinner." As Miguel gathered his plans, Derek reflected on how completely his life had been rebuilt. The penthouse apartment had been replaced by a sprawling estate in the hills, where Sarah's laughter echoed through rooms filled with children's toys and family photographs. The cautious, damaged man who'd emerged from Amanda's betrayal had learned to love again, to trust again, but with the wisdom that came from having survived the ultimate deception. Derek's intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Morrison, there's a call from the Department of Corrections. Something about prisoner 47,829 requesting to speak with you." Amanda, even after 5 years, hearing her prisoner number could still trigger memories of the woman who'd planned his murder with such methodical precision. Derek had received similar requests twice before and had ignored them both. Today, however, something made him curious about what his former wife might want to say after half a decade in maximum security prison. Put the call through. Amanda's voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, age defeated. "Derek? Thank you for taking my call. What do you want, Amanda?" "I'm dying." Derek felt no sympathy, only mild curiosity. "What's wrong with you?" "Cancer. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less." "Derek, I need to tell you something before I die. Something I should have told you years ago." "I'm listening." "It was never supposed to happen. The murder plot, I mean. It started as Troy's fantasy, something he'd talk about when he was drunk and angry about losing contracts to you. I never took it seriously until—" Amanda's voice broke. "Until I realized I was pregnant." Derek gripped the phone tighter. "Pregnant, 3 months along when we planned your murder. The baby was Troy's, and I was terrified you'd find out. The murder plot suddenly seemed like the only way to avoid losing everything. Our marriage, your fortune, my reputation. I thought if you died in an accident, I could claim the baby was yours and no one would ever know." Derek stared out his office window, processing this revelation. Amanda hadn't just planned to murder him for money. She'd planned to murder him to cover up her adultery and pass off her lover's child as Derek's heir. "What happened to the baby?" "Miscarriage. 2 weeks after your fake funeral. It was like God was punishing me for what I tried to do." Amanda was crying now. "Derek, I've had 5 years to think about what I threw away. What we had was real. Our marriage was real. I destroyed something beautiful for something that was never worth having." Derek's voice was cold as winter steel. "Amanda, you called me to tell me you're dying, and you expect what exactly? Forgiveness? Sympathy? I expect nothing. I just needed you to know that I understand now what I lost. You were the best man I ever knew, and I tried to kill you for money and a fantasy that was never real. You're right about one thing, Amanda. What we had was real, and that's exactly what makes your betrayal unforgivable. You didn't just try to murder a stranger. You tried to murder someone who loved you completely, someone who would have given you anything, forgiven you anything, except the one thing you actually did." Derek paused, looking out at the city he'd conquered while Amanda rotted in a prison cell. "I hope you have time to think about that during whatever time you have left." Derek hung up without saying goodbye and immediately deleted Amanda's number for his phone's call log. She would die as she'd lived for the past 5 years, as a memory that grew less relevant with each passing day. That evening, Derek arrived home to find his twins waiting by the front door with a banner they'd made in art class. "Happy Father's Day, Daddy." It was 2 months early, but their enthusiasm was infectious. Sarah greeted him with a kiss and the kind of genuine smile that Derek had forgotten was possible during his marriage to Amanda. "How was your day?" "Interesting. I'll tell you about it later. Right now, I want to see what masterpieces the twins have created." As Derek played with his children and helped Sarah prepare dinner, he reflected on the phone call with Amanda. Her revelation about the pregnancy added another layer to her betrayal, but it didn't change anything fundamental. She'd still planned his murder with cold precision, still celebrated what she thought was his death, still chose money and lust over love and loyalty. The difference was that Derek Morrison no longer defined himself by Amanda's betrayal. He'd built something better, something stronger, something that honored the man he'd been before that night at the gas station, while incorporating the hard-won wisdom he'd gained afterward. After dinner, as Derek tucked his children into bed, 5-year-old Derek Jr. asked the question that had become their nightly ritual. "Daddy, tell us the story about Uncle Miguel and the gas station." Derek settled into the chair between their beds and began the story he'd told hundreds of times, but never tired of telling. Once upon a time, there was a man who thought he knew everything about the people he loved. But one night, at a gas station far from home, He learned that sometimes the most important warnings come from the most unexpected places. As Derek told the story, he edited out the violence and betrayal, focusing instead on themes of courage, loyalty, and the importance of choosing to help others even when it's dangerous or difficult. His children didn't need to know about Amanda's treachery or Derek's methodical revenge. They needed to know that good people sometimes face terrible challenges, but that honor, persistence, and careful planning could overcome even the most devastating betrayals. Later that night, as Derek held Sarah while she slept, he thought about the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. Amanda's betrayal had nearly destroyed him, but had also revealed strengths he hadn't known he possessed and taught him lessons that had made everything afterward possible. Derek Morrison had learned to love again, but carefully. He'd learned to trust again, but wisely. He'd learned that some people were capable of betrayals so profound that forgiveness became impossible, but he'd also learned that such betrayals didn't have to define the rest of his life. Amanda would die in prison within months. A forgotten woman whose greatest accomplishment had been showing Derek Morrison exactly what he was capable of when pushed to his limits. Troy would spend at least another 20 years behind bars, his dreams of wealth and freedom reduced to memories that grew dimmer with each passing day. But Derek Morrison would wake up tomorrow in a house filled with love, surrounded by people who'd chosen to build something together rather than tear down. He'd go to work in a company that employed thousands of people and created something lasting and valuable. He'd come home to children who thought he was a hero and a wife who loved him not despite his flaws, but because of his strength. As Derek drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of Miguel Santos, the frightened young man whose moral courage had saved everything. Tomorrow, Derek would call Miguel and suggest they take their families on a weekend trip to the mountains. Not to the cabin where Amanda and Troy had planned murder, but to a beautiful lake where children could play and adults could appreciate how precious and fragile the good things in life really were. Derek Morrison had survived the ultimate betrayal and built something better than what he'd lost. He learned that some wounds never fully heal, but that didn't mean they had to poison the rest of your life. And he discovered that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies. It was building a life so successful and fulfilling that their attempts at destruction became irrelevant footnotes in a much larger, more important story. The warning at mile 47 had saved Derek's life. But more than that, it had taught him that sometimes the most